make one. Good over the years. Five members, we only. I sure agree with that.
That's what I'm looking for out. Is, but I asked it.
Back in. We recommended a count.
Yeah, then you got,
It'll,
right.
so, yeah. Not, I'll call a question. Recommendation. I'd like to bring conflict between our committee four-year terms.
I'd like to review.
Yeah, well,
1806.
that changed everything. Well,
What term was it?
limitations, but my problem is there's an okay. All whereas we had an applied
Yeah.
to us.
Reaction at John's suggestion here is, I don't think that, that we have to that's a technical matter, the council and council. I wouldn't mention term limits.
No,
It covers
covers
boards,
all
commissions,
committees, and they
You can't
changed.
rescind that tells us 10:18?
Does, there's a,
Personal law, refers to. That can be done by amending, that can be done by amending.
I think I agree. A I think in March or April. And in our ordinance,
Somebody in town does, but in Section 6 of 1806, 4 members shall be appointed for 2 members shall be appointed.
our 2 years, that was in 2007. I was reappointed in, anyway. I've got everybody.
Dick, October 2020. Ed, October. Vacancy.
Over and
Let's move on.
is over 300. Compared the budget for the maintenance of the stormwater. During item came up by the council members, all the costs. When I came in and I was trying to separate the capital expenditures following Mr. Steele. Handle any operating types of expense. Plan was to take the capital. So that being the case, in addition to their action, they said this would back the adjustments, but earlier calculations had to taken out of the stormwater. I mean, for the capital. So right now, the $300,000.
First of all, this is I very much miss the since I wasn't getting. Side doesn't even, I don't think, current financial. I'm at a loss to how this matters, accounting-wise, reporting-wise. Secondly, I want to say that the fact it was a loan, vote on that matters. I did have a vote on it, and I remember it was stormwater fund be treated see alone clearly capable. Thirdly, with respect to statute ordinance created the stormwater crystal clear. And it said payback period is legal counsel need to be.
So,
thousand is budgeted.
so the general,
Term of, transfer to take it from the general fund and place it into the. Due from, or
Well, that temporary would, I have something
transfer the funds as a. Stormwater fund only needed. Has nothing to do with the loan.
Back in 2000,
experience. Verbs. Relevant to transport. Lines and fix. That's just money over there for terms of the gas. General fund, capture all costs township that unless a special in fact, all operations take all under the general fund, except
Mind, I mean, why have a stormwater utility? General fund and
I think the answer to that is some source of funding.
So they raise the ad valorem tax.
that's the answer.
But, Mr. Chairman, it was updated a couple of 1506. Heinz system is everything. Maintenance costs, personnel costs. Stormwater fund, which pay for the system, which to personnel costs, the whole. We also point something else out. We're talking. It's the town's policy. The stormwater. Stretch beyond that into some other summary when we enacted that there will be a source of grant funding and cost sharing. The policy. This grant and funding and cost sharing. So would come from grants, county, whatever. Remaining 75% was designed to come from the stormwater fund. Acted 1820. Presumably, this purported their opinion.
Who's the writer, who's the author of that?
The stormwater the executive summary is whoever the town uses to. When the council puts an ordinance together, I suppose, town manager or somebody is developing some sort of executive summary so that the members know what they're talking about. In the Congress, we used to write reports so the members, and we had staff people that are explaining it to them. Our council uses staff people to explain, and they use executive summaries. I don't know who writes them. Maybe writes them, Michelle. I just don't have any idea. But they are official documents and available on the town website. In any case,
I never got an executive study.
well, you have to look for it on the town website. You have to look for it. What you have to do is you have to go in there
No, I
when
was
they
gonna say,
enacted
when I was mayor,
1820.
we never got one.
Oh, well, this is an improvement then in
Right.
town management. That's a good. All right. So, so the stormwater utility then, it was designed to provide the 75%, and the 25% would come from. And that's my case, Mr. Chairman. I know there's an argument here. I know folks want to use the ad valorem tax because it's easier to go fetch money from when you run short here because you don't have a high enough tax rate or whatever that ERU rate. It's easier to go fetch money from here and what do we call it, a loan or whatever. That's not the way this system was designed, and we're departing from it if we're doing it.
May I make a comment? I don't have a dog in this discussion. I'm trying to provide some information to you. When a resolution or an ordinance is written, it's usually written in general as possible to allow the flexibility of the government to act and use resources available to be able to meet. And they usually write those resolutions or ordinances stating it can do this or as opposed to will do this, given that latitude of abilities to use other resources, because one primary resource may not, within its own self, generate sufficient funds for the demand. So that's just a piece of information. The other is because the resolution is the law and the executive document is to help explain that resolution, but the resolution is the law that we would admit operations from, not necessarily from the executive documents. It is good information. It does help understand these things, but the final decision is the council members who would discuss these items and make the decision what resources will pay for these things. Just because it's being paid out of general funds does not mean it's being paid out of ad valorem taxes. And out of a $7 million budget. So the money comes from other revenue sources that can be administered for the operations of the township at the discretion of the town council. Not just limited to one particular source. The general fund can assist if that's what the council deems appropriate at that time. Just information, okay?
Let me ask you this, Mr. Lang. The other have is the water utility fund, correct?
Water fund that provides the funding, so it's self-administered. It collects all of its revenues. It pays for its expenses. We have the building fund that also collects its revenues and can be only used for the purpose of the building operation. We have a separate fund for the gas tax to show you.
Well, no, I'm not talking about all the different funds. I'm talking about where we've actually created a utility. And the only other utility we created was the water utility. Are there any outside of revenues generated by the water fund, by the revenues, are there any general funds or other funds used to supplement the water utility? So it's just a stormwater utility where there's outside funds being used.
When I say that, I'll say this one more thing. In the water fund, we do charge the water fund an admin fee to qualify administrative operations that do need function. So there is a cost for administrative services, but there's not a funds from the general fund to supplement it or.
That, of course, was what was intended when we created the utility fund and intended when we created the water fund.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Jim Steele. Rogers is 95% correct. Water utility does charge the stormwater utility sending out bills. Water bill is included on the water bill. Stormwater utility actually pays the water utility its fair share for county is charged because the sewer bill, water bill, so portion of the bill, water utility. Water utility does get some money from stormwater, some for administrative fees, some from Lee County.
Right.
But
Well,
it's
that's
its
just a
own separate
reimbursement.
fund, and
Yeah.
it's, in my opinion, totally.
I just kind of catch up here.
Go ahead, John.
If I understand, if I've been following the conversation, 310 is actually loan from the general fund because the assessment, the ERU rate is not sufficient to cover the total expenses. Correct?
Well, it's a loan because the council said it was going to be a loan.
But
They had a
the
vote on it.
reason that the money is needed is
Yeah.
because whatever the current rate is insufficient.
Yes.
The understand about paying back the loan, the temporary part there, but the first part is, what is the rationale, and even going way back to, just for a moment, to 2016, why didn't the cover the full expenses and that this was set up to take general fund money? What was the rationale?
Back then, it did cover the net.
The issue is, one of the ways to handle it is, we haven't adjusted that assessment to cover any is that we are now taking out of the general fund, correct? So, two issues on a plate. One is, why isn't the council having the finance office go in, determine that, do the proper assessment? There's a couple ways of doing that. You could do it actively, and they can say, this is our expected expense, or, and this goes to the loan, at the end of the year, when they know actually how much That's the adjustment for the water, the ERU for the next year, and that assessment increase pays the temporary loan each year. Can we do something like that and make a recommendation to look at that? Go ahead, Jim. I'm just trying to summarize and catch up.
Jim?
That's a good thought. I think what the council needs to determine legally, can the stormwater fund use? Once that's determined, everybody agrees, then you need to adjust annually stormwater ERU rate to cover the expenses.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I only have one comment to make there. John, I'm in 100% agreement with your assessment there, your analysis. It may be illegal. It may be a legal problem. I think, first of all, it's a policy question. It's if to me, the council has stated its policy. Regardless of what the legal underpinning is, that's the policy. The policy's legal, as far as I know. If it's policy, it doesn't need a legal opinion. But I wouldn't object to it. I'm just telling you that the first question is, what's the policy? The policy seems clear to me in terms of the paperwork that supported this enactment.
I guess
I would agree that legally, policy they determined is illegal. You can say no more from the general fund if that's the town's policy, and require that to be a loan repaid each year. I agree with that, totally. The town needs to determine what are we going to use, and it's legal, and then they set the policy, and if they don't want to use any gas tax funds, general fund dollars, and that ERU rate needs to be increased substantially to cover the cost of stormwater utility.
I think that, and maybe this is what Ed's talking about, policy is, that's a more transparent representation of this fund than loaning money from a general fund that someone who is not proficient in accounting, or even someone who took accounting, has to go through and try and go back and forth, look at transfers, when they're paid, when they weren't paid 5 years back on loans. So I think by doing a temporary loan from the general fund that gets assessed and paid back the following year is much more transparent to the taxpaying public and takes care of the temporary, and it kind of solidifies exactly what the original intent in 2018, whatever that ordinance was.
Let me clarify. I think we're missing a piece here. The biggest part of this whole discussion is the capital project. We've got a $13 million capital project going on right now. That capital project is, we got approval to borrow $13 million from SRF to build our stormwater system. If you, and what we calculated, and I think Jim was very much involved at that time, and that was how much money we capitalized, borrow from, be able to pay back within the funds that we would generate through special assessments. Right now, those rates that Jim was talking about earlier, $19 a month, would generate $1.1 million a year. That $1.1 million a year translates to debt payments would cover up to $13, $15, $17 million. Depends on how many streets storm drainage would be required to be built to take the water off the streets for the citizens of this town. The repair is an entirely separate item, and Jim had that set up back when it first started and said at that time, most that we would probably need to spend on maintenance is about $150,000 a year, various types of maintenance. Am I stretching it too far? Am I right with what I'm saying?
That was the initial cost back in 2016. The projection by the engineers it would increase so much annually, and I think it would cap out at about $600,000 in the year 2030 or something like that. But as you put more stuff in, the maintenance had to go up annually.
The debt would probably, we start paying the debt for the first time in November of 2020, or stormwater is concerned. So we've got a period of time which we were able to build. We spent $5 million so far on the stormwater system. We'll start paying that debt off shortly, and it's based off of a $13 million authorization. If we don't build anything beyond that $13 million, of course, we're limited to that, and that the debt may run, let's pick a number, $700,000 a year, $600,000 a year, so we would have excess money, and that would take care of the maintenance. What I think Jim was trying to explain. So we have to start with the capital, and how much does the town want to spend to do their renovate water system, what streets need it, what streets don't need it. We've done quite a few, and we're wrapping those down to our first big loan package, which is based off of $13 million. Now, we're not going to spend that $13 million. We're going to spend a portion of it. It becomes our debt obligation right now. So let's say that's $500,000. If we go to the next phase of another $4 or $5 million, the question is, the debt payment would be how much of the $1.1 million? Then you see what you. The question comes up: do you spend the money on maintenance, or do you spend the money on upgrading your storm system throughout the township? That become, to me, as a finance person, that's your first thing: to find out how much you want to spend for your capital entirely, and look at your expenses. Now, a study is being sought right now to consider what, if any, rates need to be changed. How much, based off of capital needs, operating needs, et cetera, because right now, all of our loans are predicated on our revenue stream from our assessments. So SRF is lending us that money based off of the fact that we are in a good financial position to pay that money back, and we got plenty of room to do that within.
Well, addressing Lombard's concern, or point, that it's a policy issue as well as a legal issue. But would it have been the rationale of the town council when they said that the $310,000 being advanced from general fund to stormwater fund was a loan? Doesn't that concede the fact that the policy is that they are not using the general funds in general for subsidizing the stormwater?
That's a correct statement.
Otherwise, what was the rationale of the policy for it being called a loan?
The only issue, the way I understood this item to come up before you, Dan, and inquiries was, when does it get paid back? If it's going to get paid back every year, then you might as well take that $1.1 million, subtract the $310,000 from it, and you only have $700,000 to spend. At $700,000, probably meet the debt services right now, but in another little bit, when you borrow more money to put more capital into the ground, your debt service is going to go up, and therefore your operating source dries up.
You know, Robert, I would listen carefully to what John Goggin recommended. He recommended a procedure which nails the answer to that question, going through a calculation, see how much you need to raise to repay the loan, and that becomes the de facto increment in the PRU rate. That's the way you do it.
Well, I don't disagree with anything that John presented. Right now, what is the total capital that you're going to need to pay debt back on? And now, $1.1 million that's been assessed and collected today is the funding source to be able to pay the capital on a $13 million loan. How much more are we going to spend? I know $1 million in track right now. It's going to call for debt. So even though, and we have to have the cash flow to do that. You cannot turn around and spend $800,000 or $900,000 a year on capital if we don't have the cash flow in a timely basis to pay the contractor.
You know,
We have to have cash flow, and if you're going to spend that money back to the general fund, if I may, if we borrow $310,000 at the end of the year, pay the $310,000 back that year using a term period of 1 year, then you won't have the cash flow to make the next contract payments. You have to have that cash flow rolling and flowing in order to meet your needs. But a study, like you were talking about, would determine.
And I didn't even advocate that it gets paid back in the same year. That, what I'm saying is that determines the assessment increase. That assessment increase that comes in the next year could pay off that debt in the following year. That to me is the cash flow issue, but my concern is that the way it's being handled right now is not transparent to the citizens. And it doesn't represent the 2018 policy that says all expenses in there. And all I was advocating is we look at a way to do a systematic review of that assessment, increase that assessment based on whatever that additional operating costs were, the 310,000 we did, and then we come back with a payback period, and if we address the cash flow, we can deal with that. Then you just make that loan repayment 24 months as opposed to 12 or 18 months, whatever the cash flow issue becomes.
That would be a factor. That in prior years, the general fund incurred those costs because before there was a stormwater fund, I guess general fund, the ditches and the drainage flexible. And with transparency, let me say this. I set up a department for stormwater maintenance in the general fund because this item had not come up at that time. So it was identified for transparency. One could see what was actually being spent for maintenance of a stormwater system. And the other fund, in the stormwater fund, was to cover the capital and the debt payments back on that capital item. However, the council requested that be changed. And so we have complied with that. And it would be reported that way in the financial statements at year, where we would know how much did we actually use general funds money, that we only have to pay that portion back.
Yeah, Mr. Cody.
We talk about this 310, that was a one-time deal. We're not transferring another $300,000 every year.
I only know it of this year,
It was once off.
sir. Unless the council tells me to do something different, but right now it's only 300,000, yes, sir.
Yeah, but in prior year, I mean, every year, there have been monies from general fund being transferred, but not identified as a loan.
Okay.
It wasn't determined to be a loan at that time.
But they weren't determined to be a loan. Suddenly, the transfers became a loan. As Jim Steele, there were transfers every year.
Well, when you say every year, that was in
utility was
18 and 19.
Well, there were, general funds were being used as needed when,
Well, the stormwater fund didn't start collecting money until around April of 2017.
Yeah.
So we only had 6 months of revenues in 17.
all right.
And 18 was our first full year in which we collected full revenues and we had some operating expenses. The first year in 17, I have to go back and look at the records to see how much we actually spent, Jim. And
But before the utility was formed, general fund
was the source.
was the storm. I mean, that was okay. There's no issue there because there was no special utility. Once the utility was formed, then policy as to gas money or general fund money being used to support the stormwater utility. So anything that happened before that was a town expense out of the general fund. But once you establish this utility, now you've got a set of rules that you got to follow.
Back in 2017, you transferred 100 stormwater utility. This year's budget contemplates is 310, 311, nothing in between. Based on your stormwater fund budget in 2020.
Correct. And what I tried to do in 18, 19, or 19, 20 was to pull that out of the, so that we had a separate department that covered all costs so that anybody wanted to know what the cost of maintenance would be in a department of its own so it doesn't get commingled with anything else. You're right, Mr. Lombard.
You say commingled,
We gave it so that there was an issue brought up about transparency, to maintain transparency. And because we have a stormwater fund, and that was, in my viewpoint, was to take care of all the capital. We didn't know how much capital we were going to incur.
Different now.
I put it in the general fund and I labeled it Stormwater Maintenance Fund. Went to council for consideration. That's when they recommended that, or policy to that money that I had in there as a loan to the stormwater and put it in the stormwater fund. So you'd have all the stormwater activity. And that's what we've done.
All right, what we've got to accept right now, we've got to accept the fact that 1820 identifies a stormwater fund as the entire corpus of expenditures paid for the stormwater project. That's it. Capital costs, operating costs, maintenance costs, personnel costs. That's the stormwater fund, that's the law. That's what the law is. So although you have to understand the different, the sources and the expenditures, the nature of the expenditures, the stormwater fund is all those expenses, the entire cost of stormwater, whether it's construction or maintenance.
Well, I don't disagree with your statement, except I don't think those resolutions or ordinances are absolute, meaning every word is absolute without consideration of anything else. So if the general fund is determined by the legislative body to transfer funds or pay things out of it, it can do that. Because it says it can, if I'm not mistaken, it uses terms of that nature as opposed to absolute terms. But I'm not here to argue that. I'm just trying to give you all information as to what I did and why it's been recorded.
Real quick, one is, I can see we'd have sub-accounts in there to show maintenance, and we can identify that in the transparency. I get that. This was the transparency in the funds. But do we know why, why they now call it a loan? It appears, this is very subjective, they had 18 in that ordinance, because it said all the monies would come out of the stormwater fund. That's why they called it a loan as opposed to the way they had treated it in the past because of the new ordinance. But do we know why they identified it as a loan this year as opposed to just a flat-out transfer?
Well, John, the statute says the loan. The statute, 1820 says that you can loan money from the general fund to the stormwater. The statute says that. It says temporary loan in the statute. The statute authorizes the loan. The statute contemplates that if you need money over and above the grants and so forth and the stormwater utility rate, you can borrow money from the general fund. That's why the statute enacted that. That's what the council did. They voted on it, as a matter of fact.
That goes to exactly what your point is, that this have to come up with a more reasonable assessment in order to cover the actual cost, or we continue to take the money out of the general fund going forward, because it will.
I think your process,
Hey, go
your
ahead.
procedure makes a lot of sense.
Jim? Oh, Ray?
If I can,
Yes, please.
it's a
Vice Mayor Murphy.
political issue. Fencing around it, but you know what it is. There was a guy from Bay Beach that came to make sure that all these costs were being allocated to the instead of addressing the elephant in the room, which was the ERU, the council said, well, we'll make it a loan, and that'll be repaid sometime in the future without addressing the ERUs. Recommendation. Bring it back right away, address the ERUs, get it to where it should be. No, we're gonna have a utility or we're not gonna have a utility. It's gonna pay for itself or it's not gonna pay for itself. No. Political part of it settles down, get it done for the next election. Because it'll be so get it done right away after this election.
Still.
And the town has done that. Is in the process of doing that. If you want to explain.
Well, the town realizes that you have to look at a rate study for the water and stormwater. We're pursuing that as we now to find out exactly what's going to be needed to meet all the obligations. A contractor hired who's in that area, and they will do the analysis. They'll bring everything into back, finish their study, and it'll be presented to the council for consideration.
But that person doing that rate study has got to be directed as to what the policy of the town is. So whether he's going to include in the rate other supplemental funds or not.
They will. These companies that do this type of stuff pull all the records
You know, I-
necessary.
Yeah, that's my point. I hear that often with other committees that I am with as well. And I would like to know what the timing of this is, what the contract calls for, and what the representation of these people actually know and have years of experience on this, where their input's gonna come into. Because I would hate to see the town do another study, and then it comes back to people that understand this issue in depth, and they have to start over. We just had that, and I'll use the public safety, we just had a lighting study that's caused a firestorm on the island because the MPO didn't really bring in representation from the people that understood what was going on. They did a study that was different intent of where the town actually wanted it to go. And I guess representation, members of this committee or representative of this committee that has some experience would have in that study. This is my 2 cents.
That's the determination of the contractor that we're looking at this. They'll have all the information. Do it. We had the study done once before, back 2017, Jim. There was a contractor who had done a study at that time, and now it's time to
For water.
Water only. So now we need to do one, bring it up to current, and that's going to be addressed very shortly.
There has not been anyone appointed at this point.
Does that go to council next week?
The results will be going as soon. I'm not sure exactly the date it's going, but I'm going to say it's going very shortly, either this meeting or the next meeting, as a recommendation. So we have started we went out for bids for a consultant who is knowledge and expertise in these areas. They've coming back with their recommendation, and then that determination will be decided by the council when it's presented to them.
I'd like to formally request that when a consultant is chosen and when a contract is prepared, that we be furnished a copy of the contract consultant to tell us what the scope guidelines he has in determining the rate. I think we'd like to see that.
And to take away from anybody. I'll make sure that I pass that information.
It seems to me, though, that this policy and statutory issue has to be resolved. Them to proceed with appropriately, as our vice mayor has pointed out, they have to make a decision there on the council level. Well, this has been a very enlightening conversation. What have we accomplished?
We got a lot on the table, and I think all of us understand the situation a little better. At least I hope so. I know I do.
I do. I agree with that.
And I agree with that as well, but it's still, and I guess this goes to Vice Mayor here, is that there is a wealth of knowledge on this committee that understands this issue, and I really hope that they don't let this get too far down the road. The criteria for the RFP, the selection, and the contract, and then bring in the expertise to work with this individual. I'm hoping that the council will allow the members of the committee to see this, make comment on it before actually engage in the contract and move forward.
I think we're fortunate that Vice Mayor Murphy is with us today, because this is going to be a critical issue for the council. Is there anything further then at this point on item Roman numeral 5? I'm going to digress for a moment. Sang, you have several staff here. You want to introduce them for the record?
Yes,
present?
the lady sitting in the row here is Cheryl Manning. She's your accountant. Actually, she's the assistant finance director. I promoted her because of all the work that she's done and her knowledge of what we're doing in the office. Next to her is Andre Heading. Andre is a CPA who's retired from the federal DC, not with the federal government, but he's been in government at the national level. Embassy. So he's been a great addition to our organization, helping us get through the audits and budgetary items and getting our system, tightening all the loose ends on our accounting system that we can pull together. So this is the heart of the team. Of course, in the back is Christy, who's the manager, director of the water department. Very familiar with the water utility system. That's the staff that we have. I asked the accounting staff to show up this morning for an item having to do with the audit staff, since they have been knee-deep. We didn't get out of the swamp until about June or July of last year before we were ready to jump into the swamp again for this year. So with that introduction, if you want, I'll start with date of the audit.
F6.
Yeah. Well, you have it, these people have been introduced to us before. I just wanted the record to show that they're here and present, and we're happy to have them. And I understand they're going to be involved in our update on the audit. But, briefly, Roman numeral 6, discussion by Mayor Saracita, a discussion of a request. As I understand that this was not a formal town council action, it was Mayor Saracita thought it would be a good idea for us to look into what's going on with the stormwater fund. Excuse me. I called her about that to get more specificity, and it was just kind of a vague. She said, well, it's kind of leaving that up to you. I think the discussion we just had on the general fund and the water fund bears directly on her concerns. And I don't know that I can add anything to that. It was kind of ambiguous.
Dan,
Yes.
I have an updated agenda.
Yes,
That item was deleted.
I withdrew it because of just what the chair said.
This is the updated agenda, but,
Well,
I mean, your comments are still relevant. But
yeah, I'm sorry. I had the right agenda. Then I picked this up this morning, and I thought this was the updated, the one with that back on it.
Well, it doesn't
Well,
surprise me.
I had requested this be put on it, and I think that, I don't know, unless somebody has some suggestion as to what else we can get ourselves involved in with the stormwater.
I think we covered the waterfront, Dan.
Does anybody have anything
does
further
you.
on that? Okay. All right, now, if you may proceed with your update.
We had the auditor start their early field work in mid-December, and they actually started their full field work in January and February. So they're wrapping up the audit. For a conversation that I received from our auditors, the audit is wrapping down. They have completed the single audit process. There's a special report called CFA. It's a special federal report that has to identify loans and grants that we receive from the federal and state levels to report those so that it's all accounted for. We had a little bit of a unusual element added to the process, and that was FEMA. FEMA, because of that storm that took place in 2017, September, I believe it was, in 17, expenses ran 2017 all the way through into 19 because of openness of requests to mitigate certain elements so we could get reimbursed on. Because it covered 2 years, almost 3 years, those reporting requirements that had to be separated and defined as to those expenses, when did the expenses incur, what was the revenue that we received, because we received over $600,000 of the monies we spent. We've incurred really closer to $900,000, but the state and feds have not approved about about $350,000, $360,000. That's still under discussion and interpretation. We believe we're going to be successful in even that reimbursement. We've received $600,000. A portion of that $600,000 had to be broken out from those prior years and identified with the revenues to the period in which we expended the funds. And that had to be reported. So it was we had to go through almost 3 years of documentation, pull the right data out. And apparently, in the reporting requirements by the FICPA, this whole process of grant funding and FEMA is changing as we go along. So we had to identify the right expert to be able to evaluate what activities constitute an accrual and which ones we would determine the accrual and then determine an unearned revenue to be recorded with it. So it took a little bit of complexity to get to that, but it was one of the latter things in the audit to get to. Wrapping it up, indicated to me if all goes well, they're going to try to have a report or a preliminary report for us by the end of this month. We'll be able to present the audit report to the council. Went to that. So if all goes well, we'll see something in the next 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks to look at as far as the audit is concerned.
Is there something in the current accounts then that receivable from FEMA that you've established?
It will be this fiscal year, yes. In prior years, the expense was incurred, and because the funds had not been obligated by the federal government, we could not record it as a receivable. We had to it as an expenditure of the township at that time. And subsequently, the money came in, and that's where we had to break it down into that portion that was obligated in prior years, because they did obligate it over a period of 3 years. This is the first time I've been acquainted with a storm of this nature that we didn't have it resolved within 1.5 years after the storm occurred. But we're in our 3rd year now, and we're still not settled. It just
And you understand, the reimbursements that were made, they related to a prior year. Did you go back and restate the prior year, or does it all come into the year that you got the money?
It gets recorded in the year we received the money. A portion of it, that portion that was reflective of prior years, just is recorded as revenues received.
Okay.
Only the expenses that they can marry to an accrual would be broken out, tied to that accrual. It's a special reporting requirement. I have to admit, it's beyond what I have dealt with in prior years, and it seems like every year somebody looks at it a little bit different and comes up with a different approach on how it should be reported. We finally sifted through all of that. Let you know, we did receive over $600,000 of the approximately $900,000 worth of expenses that we've.
The fiscal year completed
in 2000. I think we got the 600 over. Well, it kept coming in multiple pieces to where by September we received the $600,000. If I'm not mistaken. Of 89. Some of it came in this year.
The accounts, where will we see that income?
That'll be in our emergency fund that we set up so that we could separate that from all the other activities. So
It'll
we
be
do have a
revenue
fund.
in that fund.
Yes, sir. In past years, we used to have a reserve in the general fund for emergency. I've subsequently set up a separate fund for that so that we'd have the money there when the storm occurred, we'd start using it. We still have a reserve. That's about where we are, and it looks like for what I received, it's audit is a clean looking audit from problems that we had in the prior year. It was just due to all the changes from hardware to software to staffing to changes in our operational side of things, and due to a qualified and more experienced staff, some of these things. Also with that audit, just so that you know, it is, with these expenses for the stormwater and the water programs, we're talking about spending 12, 13, $14 million on these, that, between the two of them. That calls for a lot of record keeping, submission of documentation to the federal, to the state government to get reimbursed on those types of things. So we're monitoring and collecting that money on a daily basis, and the contractor, getting the bills, getting the money back, holding all the way through. Those things all have to be recorded in a special recording scope of the audit. We have achieved that, and that was big areas that is usually done toward.
No surprises.
Surprise that I'm aware of. I've been staying in touch with auditors all along to see if there's any issues that they have concerns with. And the ones I spoke with you about are the ones that were brought to my attention. Just hired more assistance in that area to break it out and report it the way it.
Certainly.
You haven't met since. When the preliminary report comes out, Robert, if the copy of that and associated notes, them to review, and they could have one more meeting before that's presented to the council.
Glad to, absolutely.
Yeah, we have, thank you, Mr. Murphy, we appreciate that. I think we requested that in the past, and hopefully we'll. Are there any other questions for Mr. Lang regarding the audit?
Regarding what?
The
Oh, the audit? No.
audit, no. Well, that concludes what we have on the agenda, but I'd like to request, Bob, in the future, we have a standard item on the agenda for members' comments. And I know that particularly after a lapse of 4 months or so, there's going to be some things that other members of this committee might like to inform us about. So assume we have that on our agenda, and I'm going to ask at this time if any of the members have anything else that they would like to bring up.
Mr. Chairman. I have 2 items. One is, I'd like to see the current financial reports added to the town website. I don't see them, I look for them. Jim tells me he couldn't find them either, but I'd like to see the latest financial reports up to date. The standard budget versus expenses and revenues and so forth, and the normal asset balance sheet type presentations, and so be helpful to all of us, all citizens too. They're not on the website now, and I'd like to see them there. I think they belong there. Secondly, I went to look for the approved 2020 budget on the website, and there's something which is called the approved 2020 budget, and I just don't think it is. I even asked one of your staff people to interpret it for me. There's a couple columns in there, and aren't labels, no column headings. It just isn't the latest 2020. It might have been some proposal somewhere. You need to have the latest, if we have something, and it's labeled approved 2020 budget, you need to have something in the website which a citizen can go to, or an audit committee member, or anybody can go to and ask for the current 2020 budget, the current budget. It's not there, and it needs to be.
Mr. Lombard, it is there.
Well, I'll tell you, I've got a printout from it. If you want to come and explain it to me after the meeting, you're welcome to do that. I asked one of your clerks to do it. I asked even Jim to take a look at it. He couldn't figure it out either, so, but maybe we start reading it right, so you can show it to me.
I'll be glad to, Mr. Lombard.
Is there no printed copy of the budget? Only on the website?
On the website, so it can be active from the website anytime. We operate off the budget. It's in our system. I don't have extra copies laying around.
Doesn't the law require a copy of a copy of the budget be available for,
It's on the webpage, and that's what the law requires.
can only has to be on the website?
If anybody wants a copy, we can print a copy up at a cost, collect off of that. Once the budget's adopted, we put it in the system and we put it on the webpage.
How about the current financial reports, Robert?
No, they're not. And part of there's a reason for some of that, whether it's acceptable or not. And we started the audit, put my staff completely on the audit and transfer closing out the end of the year, managing the accruals, the payments that have to go out, as well as all the requirements on the grants. That took precedence in October and November. We don't get any revenues in for most part in any of the operations, because most of them are accruals. They have to be reported in the prior years. So the first month that you actually, we start seeing activity that is material to be managed in our budget would be late December or January. We do collect taxes in late November. Usually it comes in the last week of November, usually the first week of December. I'm working on them as we talk, and I'll be putting those all on the webpage from October through January, and I'm working on February as we talk. I will provide you all, I can provide you another report that just gives you all of the funds across the page so that you don't have to look multiple places. You get a picture of the status of the
Yeah,
revenues
we
to
used to get
expenses.
that routinely from you. I missed those. Those are really helpful.
I'll see that you get them, and in fact, as soon as they're printed, I will mail them to you.
All right. Thank you, Ed. Is that all? John, I think you had,
Do,
matters.
and again, I missed October, so it's been even a little longer than that for me. But last year, or actually over the last 18 months, originally was working with some gentleman who left. I met briefly with Cheryl one time, and I thought Andre was going to pick it up, but it was the procedure manual we were going to develop. What's the status on that?
It is taking a back burner. It hasn't been, but problems are the issues that we had during the audit of last year. And getting this year's audit, I had actually told everybody that the audit this year is about fast. It's not going to be held up till June to be presented to anybody. My priority changed to get the audit complied with, keep the activities going. So we have not abandoned the procedures, but it is in process. Revived in for Andre to get to it.
I'll let you know, I'll keep asking about that every month, Robert, until we get it done. So Andre, you know that'll come up, because it has been well over a year, and I know that was the new system. One of the issues I thought people had was that we didn't have well-documented procedures as to the new system. The other one I had, probably about 6 months ago, maybe even longer than that, you had sent some RFPs for review and comment on a penetration intrusion audit on the network.
That's been completed, and we've been implementing the recommendations. I'll provide you a copy of that. I'd like to have copies of the
Would.
and the penetration test. It was internal and external. They've both been completed, and we have we sure that the IT department making the changes necessary to accommodate all those issues. I'm also going to be going for more internal testings. Are using our current provider of our audit. I'm going to try to keep that as an annual element, that it's not just done every 2 or 3 years. Have them do it at random. That can do it in February. I can't. February's already paid. March or April, and then do it again in August or September or November, so that we have more periods that are being.
I'd really be interested in reading that, especially in light of the fact that, as I understand, part of our permitting system is not available online. And if I heard Roger say that it was kind of the advice of the IT department to put it back up online because of the risk of hacking and that. So That's why I brought that up. So, yeah, I'd really like to see that.
I appreciate you. Just so that you know, that's a good point. Found in our testings that there's a system we were using for the town called Packet. Packet had we had made it available for contractors and other people to be able to get in and look at the data so they could do their work. That particular system allowed a breach. So rather than have that breach there, I had it pulled off completely. I said, go close that door immediately. We were able to fix the issue that created.
By shutting it off, but what's the solution to opening it back up again? I mean,
Well, what we did is we turned it off for the external access. Use it internally. And that's where the breach came in, from the external access. So we shut that down, and now we're looking at whether we're going to keep that system, newer model, new version, whether we go to another company. It's in the works of discussion right now. Immediately pull that off the access.
there is a new RFP out in the street, or there will be?
I'm turning to the users to let me know what it is they want. And my concern is that system interface
mine
with the
too.
finance system, right? But the use of it, how many permits it processes, how does it calculate?
It gets there, but my concern was when I heard that that had been breached, and that was the concern, because once you're in, you're in.
Yes.
Understand you shut it down, but at some point, that's a function that the citizens want. I just wanted, and you answered it, you have someone looking at replacing or hardening that system, so
Now,
that should show up in the penetration.
people can't come into town hall and.
No, I get
access.
that.
Okay.
That's but it's not the service that was promised in the citizens, and that's it.
All right, thank you, John.
I just have one question. Robert, what is your work schedule?
Work 3 days a week.
Which,
Here at the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday when I'm here at town hall, and then I work from home wherever I need to take.
you're actually here 3 days a week?
Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I usually start heading out by noon time, unless something is critical that needs to be dealt with, then I'll stay till 5 o'clock. Otherwise, I'm traveling.
When you say you head out at noon, every day at noon, or
No, only
On Wednesday.
Wednesday at noon?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So it's 2.5 days, okay.
because I live up in Tampa, so I come down on a Monday morning and then leave on a Wednesday, unless I'm needed longer. If there's something critical that needs to be addressed, I'm here.
All right, anyone else? Nothing, okay. I just have one other comment, or I consider an open item. Again, it's a conflict of ordinances. The ordinance creating our committee, both the original one and then the generic one that includes all the committee, gives us the authority to make the recommendation to council, to the town council, auditor, which of course is our statutory and our primary duty. On the other hand, Ordinance 1701, which is the general ordinance of setting up the Finance Committee, requires that a selection advisory committee make a recommendation to the town council. That caused some confusion, as you recall, last year. A lot of confusion. All of a sudden, after 8 years, we got a selection advisory committee intervening between the audit committee, and so we acknowledging our duty, we made the recommendation and it went to the town council. I spoke with Amy Baker, suggesting that she discussed with the town attorney. The audit committee should be exempt from the sections in the finance committee ordinance requiring the intervention of a selection advisory committee on our recommendation. And I have not heard anything further, so that's I'm just commenting, that's an open item, and I'd like that to be taken care of.
Let me look at it, because I did read the state statute recently, and the state has amended their, or at least it appears they amended it, maybe not, which they talk about the committee established for the purpose of recommending an auditor, evaluating, going out for bids, getting the documents in from the different auditors, and then reviewing it. And on that, that body, I'll get it and make copies for you all, because it's very clear on how it's to be administered. They talk about setting up a committee who does all of those things, proposals as they come in. Get it and share it with
All
all of
right,
you.
thank you. Anything else?
Well, and would that be more, would be more appropriate for the audit? John? Advertise for
The
proposals?
ordinance creating the finance department had a whole bunch of sections on the selection advisory committee, mandating them to review all contracts.
Review all
Yeah.
contracts or proposals?
It's pretty general. Yeah,
I'll look at it with,
yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm following the flow. I'll be glad to look at it with you. That other,
Well, and suddenly they decided that we had to have that committee.
It just created an enormous of confusion here.
Yes, it did.
And,
Well, that's one reason I would like to see it
Yeah.
clarified in the ordinances, so that we don't have this confusion created
Well,
again.
I'll do that. I'll get with you on it and show you. I'll send copies to everybody.
All right, is there anything else?
Moving now adjourned.
Motion to adjourn by Mr. Lombard, seconded by Mr. Cody. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Approved. Gentlemen, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
There's a